Thank you for this tiny introduction. I want especially to thank Professor Maiucci and Professor Misha for this honor to be invited as guest speaker at this meeting. Now I'm here not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of the European Society of Endocrine Surgeons, which I happen to chair for 2 years, and also for the Eurocrine database. So when we embarked on this Eurocrine project, we aimed to create not only a register to monitor complication, but also to improve diagnostics, improve the indication for surgery, surgical techniques, and outcomes. To build a registry, you really need a budget. It's not for free, and we were lucky enough to have an initial budget which was 1.2 million euro, whereof funding from the European Union with a grant comprised 60%. This was a project within the health program of the European Union that ran between September 2013 and March 2017. The registry is currently funded by membership fees and has a broad representation of national endocrine surgical societies in Europe and across Europe in some non-European countries as well. This is what it looks like. We have more than 20 countries participating in this registry, and more than 90 departments have signed up to register data. This is the map which depicts how we have spread all over Europe. The latest department that joined was a big department in St. Petersburg. So the outline of this registry is kind of interesting. Since it's a cross-country registry, we had to make a deal on what kind of variables that should be in common for all departments and all countries. And these are called core variables. Then there is a flexibility, so each country can up to and in excess of the core variables also decide about national variables that they think are of particular importance to have. And on the local level, the department and clinic can also decide about their favorite variables that they think that they need locally. So the Eurocrine is sort of a network comprised of a number of national societies who in turn have a national boards, and they decide about the national variables, appoint representative to the Eurocrine board, extract national data, issue an annual report, and advise regarding the data extraction for research after ethical approval. On the local level, you have in each country the local hospital that has full access to their own data. They can extract it at any time through an Excel file. They can create local variables and also use a very unique tool which is called My Eurocrine. I will tell you a little bit about that further on. And there are also other types of analytical tools built into the registry. So this is what it looks like when you log in. There are some generic figures in the dashboard when you log in, and that is, for instance, how many operations you have registered, the waiting time to surgery, and the days spent in hospital. You will also note to the right of this particular page that there are a number of languages available for the database, so it has been translated to a variety of big languages, and it can principally be quite easily translated to any language on earth, as far as I understand. This is the menu system, which is very easy and self-instructive. And this is the page to register a new operation. So you choose basically what kind of operation you want to register and click on that particular button, and then this thing come up. And this is something that we are quite proud of. There is a timeline which is quite logical for registration for any patient. You start with the basic data, then the pre-operative data, then you have the data for the operation, the post-operative data, and then the follow-up. And you see the plus button at the end of this row. And when you click on that, you can that will give you further follow-up, so you can actually follow the patient for so many years that you actually want to do it. But this is, of course, not mandatory. It's done mostly for malignancy and for rare tumors and for certain complications. There is also, as you might see here, a color coding system. So before you start to register data, the button is gray. When you have registered some data, but not all, it's orange, and then it turns green when everything is finished. You will also get a prompt by email if you have some missing data, which is mandatory to register. So after a certain number of weeks or months, you will receive an email that, hey, you have forgotten to register all the data on this patient. So how do you keep track of your patient? You go to the list of your operation and you actually search the patient. Now in Sweden and some Scandinavian countries you can search by name or personal number, but in other countries you can choose the type of disease the patient has been operated, the operating day, if it's a man or woman, and also the age. And this way you can easily get to the patients that you want to register new data on. And as you see the boxes in the right of this picture, they have the same color coding system as we saw in the previous slide. So you search operations here, and by this technique, and here you can see how the registration is going for that particular patient. So there are also comparative key data as time series on the dashboard. So you choose basically what you are looking for. It's a thyroid operation, primary HPT, and then, for instance, the main indication will appear on this dashboard, and you compare your indication for surgery in thyroid disease towards your own country and also the European or international data. It's very easy to extract data for the local hospital. As I said, you just choose the kind of data that you want to download, which you have access to, and then you choose the time you want to extract for, and then you download your Excel file. So it's really easy. Now I talked a little bit about my Eurocrine, and this is really a function which we are very proud of, and we think it's a unique function, which is totally integrated in the database. By this function you can create your own variables which are specific for your clinic. But you can also perform prospective observational studies, and most importantly perhaps randomized controlled trials. So this particular tool can screen for your set inclusion and exclusion criteria. After you have clicked that the patient has been informed and consented, it will randomize the patient, and then they can also store your research program, protocols, ethical approval, patient information, etc. And then you can extract this data for your study. For instance, this is a sham or a dummy study which I created, a never monitoring study. So you'll get a prompt when you want to register a specific patient. Hey there is this study available. Are you interested to take part in this study? And if you say start survey, then everything else comes up. And the bluish box bottom left is actually the specific study variables that are sort of docked to the main registry. And you answer those questions and it's saved in the database. So we have been running basically 2.5 years. We have now a little bit shy of 25,000 surgical procedures. And what is very impressive, especially are the registration of rare diseases like in thyroid, medullary carcinoma, and aplastic carcinoma. You will also appreciate that we have already in excess of 1,000 adrenal operations, which of course give you immense power and statistical power when you want to analyze the data. Then there is another interesting feature, and that is that we have integrated this database with Microsoft Power Business Intelligence. And that means that we can design graphs and graphical reports specifically for the annual report, but you can also design it as apps. For instance, if you want some kind of decision support when you are discussing with a patient, for instance, what is the risk of malignancy if you are a person with this age and you are a female and you have a Bethesda 3? What is actually the risk statistically for cancer in this particular setting? So that's all well and done, but the question is it worth anything? And I want to try to convince you that it is really some interesting data, and I'll just show some of them. First, thyroid. In cytology, it's probably the way it looks in many countries, that most cytologies are benign, but about 14% of the cytologies are points to a malignancy. The problem is only how accurate, how good are we in our preoperative diagnostics. So I will point to Bethesda 1 and 2, the benign and non-diagnostic Bethesda categories, plus in those cases cytology was not performed. Now if you look at these different forms of cancer, take for instance medullary carcinoma, you will appreciate that over 40% had no cytology whatsoever. That means it was diagnosed after surgery. Of course, it could be a few patients there with metastasis, but that was not the majority. You will also appreciate, for instance, for medullary cancer, 6.5% had benign cytology, for instance. Or if you go to papillary cancer, you have 11% benign cytology, and also in a fairly, let's say, impressive number of patients, there were no cytology at all. So if we analyze this, generally speaking, and associated with the stage of, and the T-stage of the different, of all the cancers, you will see that if you look at, for instance, patients with PT2 and 3, that is fairly big tumors, you will see for PT2 there was a benign cytology in 11.5%, and it's still 20% had no cytology at all. That means that probably the diagnostics were erroneous or maybe not very effective anyway. And curiously, also in PT3, the benign cytology is about 7.5%, and no cytology was performed in 15-16%. This is clearly not good. We must do better. Now, then you might rebut that, okay, but what about the small cancers? Unfortunately, the figure is not that great, even if you analyze papillary thyroid cancer, PD1B or higher. You'll see benign cytology is still 7.5%, and in about 17% there was no cytology at all. And this is calls into question how good we are in diagnostic in thyroid cancer, regardless of what kind of guidelines that are available, if we are not doing workup in a proper way. So what about ultrasound? Can that be helpful? Maybe. Ultrasound is to the right, no ultrasound is to the left, with cytology, both. And as you can see, the black part of the box is benign cytology. And sure enough, the black box decreases with ultrasound, meaning that we have less patients with a benign cytology with ultrasound. And the higher Bethesda stages from 4, 5, 6, they will increase if you perform ultrasound. So let's go to primary HPT, which shows the value if you want to understand what's going on among different countries. Now, the black bar here is serum levels of total calcium. What is very interesting, because this was my bias, that in some countries in Europe, we thought that patients were operated only with, let's say, a pretty high serum calcium level. This was not the case. We operate on exactly the same indication when it comes to calcium. It's between 2.7 and 2.9, with the average being somewhere in this range. But on the other hand, if we look at the median weight of parathyroid tissue that was excised, it varies enormously. These are the green bars. So it varies between 0.6 gram for France and Sweden and goes up to 2.9, 2.6 and 2.7 grams for Turkey. Explanation, I have no specific explanation. You might consider vitamin D deficiency or some other thing, but it is an interesting observation. As you know, during the last 15 to 20 years there have been a big shift in parathyroid surgery. When I started out with this, the standard operation was bilateral neck exploration, although in our particular department we fought hard for introducing a unilateral operation. Now you see that today there is only a minority of patients being operated with bilateral neck exploration. About, let's say, 25 to 30% maximum are operated with bilateral neck exploration. But what is interesting is that with those patients that are subjected to bilateral neck exploration, about a third of them are converted from a targeted operation to bilateral neck surgery. And when you analyze those patients that are actually getting a converted operation, they have longer operation time, they have worse outcome, even compared to those who were planned from the beginning to be a bilateral neck exploration. The conversion rate for a targeted operation, if you add focused operation and unilateral neck exploration, to me the difference between those are not semantic, because it happens, that the targeted for me is that you only excise and actually identify one gland, whereas a unilateral you actually identify two glands on that side. Anyway, the conversion of those two types to bilateral neck surgery is about 14%. And that's also something that we have to, I think, address in the future, because that means essentially that you have done a lot of localization procedure, maybe at least 2, maybe even 3 sometimes, and of very little use. So this is something I think we need to address. On the other hand, should we stop with should we not do a target operation? I think we should, because the big argument for doing bilateral neck exploration was that you can identify 4 glands and excise the enlarged glands. But this slide depicts how often does this happen. How many glands do you actually identify if you perform a bilateral neck exploration. And this shows that it's about 80%. In 80% you identified 4 glands. So that means that actually that you are not doing actually the argument is not that strong as it used to be. Another thing that varies enormously between different countries is the histology. For instance, if you look to Austria, about 8% hyperplasia or multiglandular disease. In Sweden it's around 10%, but it goes up to around 20% for Switzerland, 16% for France. Why? Is there difference in pathology? Is there difference of disease? Well, at this moment we cannot tell, but this is also a very interesting observation. Going over to adrenal, of course most patients today are operated because of a tumor which you really want to excise, because you will want to be sure that there is no malignancy in that tumor. Modes of detection has to do with this. Because of CT and MRI, we detect a lot of adrenal incidentalomas, and of those who are operated today, about half of them have been detected through this kind of, let's say, wild screening due to trauma or follow-up for malignancy or whatever, and only about half of them are detected because of symptoms. This has some interesting aspects. For instance, in pheochromocytoma, about 80% of those with some kind of symptoms are blocked with an alpha blockade before surgery, which is also the recommended thing. Whereas of those who have been detected as adrenal incidentaloma, there is only a blocking an alpha blockade in about 60%, clearly showing that you are actually getting them in some kind of subclinical or preclinical stage when you operate them. And as you know, there are surgeons, for instance Martin Waltz, that claim that you really don't need an alpha blockade for at least some patients any longer. Surgery for metastasis is also a runner-up. As you see, of our cohort, 11-12% of the adrenals are actually operated due to metastatic disease. Type of operation, most popular is transabdominal endoscopic, at least in Europe, followed by the posterior endoscopic approach popularized by Martin Waltz, then laparotomy, and then robotic assisted. What is interesting with this particular slide, I find personally, is that 15% of the patients are still operated with the classical abdominal laparotomy approach. And there is definitely not 15% of adrenal cortical carcinomas in this cohort. That means you must question what's going on. We should clearly be able to do a little bit better and do even more endoscopic surgery for these patients. This is at least our initial suspicion. So with this slide, I will